He invited me to his mountain fortress not to celebrate, but to bury the evidence. He looked at my calloused hands, skin textured like 60-grit sandpaper, and saw a laborer he could exploit. He thought the old framer was just a worn-out tool to be used and discarded. He was about to find out that I don't just build houses. I know exactly where to swing the sledgehammer to bring the whole damn thing down. If you're listening to this confession, hit that subscribe button and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. It helps to know there are still witnesses to the truth out there. Because what started with a piece of mail was about to end in rubble. The invitation didn't arrive like a normal piece of mail. It landed on my life like a subpoena. It was tucked inside a heavy, cream-colored envelope that sat on my kitchen table, looking completely out of place against the scarred oak. It smelled faintly of expensive vanilla and something else, something that smelled distinctively like desperation. The gold-embossed letters caught the dim kitchen light. Eleanor's 85th birthday. The Highfall Estate, 6 p.m. I stood there, still in my work boots, holding it in my hands. My thumbs rubbed against the raised gold lettering, feeling the texture. The paper stock was thick, the kind used for royal wedding invitations or foreclosure notices, documents meant to signal a permanent, irreversible change in state. My hands were rough. The skin was textured like 60-grit sandpaper, calloused from 40 years of framing houses, pouring concrete, and driving galvanized nails into southern yellow pine. They were the hands of a man who understood how things were put together, and consequently, I knew exactly how easily they could be taken apart. This invitation, however, felt flimsy despite the heavy cardstock. It felt like a fresh coat of paint over a rotting beam. I didn't want to open it. I wanted to burn it. "We shouldn't go," my son Jason said from the doorway. I didn't turn around. I knew his stance without looking. He was leaning against the frame, arms crossed over his chest. At 28, Jason was a structural engineer. He saw the world the way I did, but through a different lens. I saw lumber, sweat, and labor. He saw vectors, load paths, and shear forces. Where I used a hammer and a level to find the truth, he used calculus and AutoCAD. He was sharper than me, faster, and far less forgiving of imperfections. "She's my mother, Jace," I said, my voice sounding tired even to my own ears. I tossed the envelope onto the table, a table I'd built with my own hands before he was born. "And she's your grandmother. If my sister is actually letting us see her for once, we take the chance." "It's not about seeing her, Dad," Jason said, pushing off the doorframe and walking into the room. The floorboards didn't creak. I had secured the subfloor perfectly years ago. He picked up the invite, inspecting it like a forensic analyst examining a stress fracture in a bridge support. "Aunt Clara and Richard haven't let us visit in 6 months," he said, his voice cold. "They ghosted us at Christmas. I called 3 times last week. No answer. Now suddenly, a gala at their remote mountain fortress?" He looked at me, his eyes dark with suspicion. "Richard's construction firm is under federal investigation for wire fraud and embezzlement. I read the filings, Dad. They are hemorrhaging liquidity. This feels staged like a load they can't carry." He was right. I knew he was right, but hope is a heavy thing to carry. "We go," I said, grabbing my heavy canvas coat. I buttoned it slowly, feeling the stiffness in my knuckles, the arthritis that arrived with the rain. "We eat the dry chicken. We tolerate Richard's bragging about his imaginary empire. We make sure Mom is breathing and not being neglected. And we leave. 2 hours, I promise, but that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was that I ignored the warning signs. I drove my truck, a Ford F-350, with a suspension stiff enough to haul a pallet of cinder blocks. It was a fortress of steel and diesel, the cab filled with the comforting scent of sawdust and old coffee. It was a stark contrast to the winding, narrow road that led up to Highfall. The estate was perched on a granite cliff overlooking the valley, isolated by miles of dense, suffocating pine forest. As we climbed the switchbacks, the sun began to bleed out below the horizon. Long, bruised shadows stretched across the asphalt like grasping fingers. "Signal is dead," Jason muttered, staring at his phone. The blue light of the screen illuminated the worry lines etched prematurely into his forehead. "I told you, Highfall is a dead zone. The topography blocks the cell towers." "Rich people pay for privacy," I said, gripping the wheel. The tires crunched loudly as we transitioned from county asphalt to private gravel. "There's privacy, and then there's isolation," Jason countered, his voice tight. "Richard installed a commercial-grade signal jammer. I saw the permit application online a few months ago. He claimed it was to prevent corporate espionage during board meetings. I call it paranoia. Or preparation. Preparation for what? We rounded the final bend, and the house came into view. It was a monstrosity of modern architecture. Cantilevered steel beams, vast sheets of tempered glass, and jagged stone angles that seemed to cut into the sky. It didn't look like a home. It looked like a villain's lair from a high-budget thriller. It sat on the absolute edge of the precipice, daring gravity to pull it down. A structural hubris. A massive iron gate blocked the driveway. It wasn't the decorative wrought iron of the suburbs. It was solid plate steel, 12 feet high, with serrated spikes along the top. A camera mounted on a concrete pillar swiveled to track us, its red lens glowing like a single unblinking eye. I rolled down the window and pressed the call button. The air outside was thin and bittingly cold. Frank and Jason Miller, here for the party. The gate didn't buzz. It groaned, a heavy hydraulic sound of pressurized oil pushing against resistance, and began to slide open slowly. "Friendly," I muttered, shifting the truck into gear. "Dad," Jason said, his voice dropping to a whisper. He was leaning out the window, looking back as we passed the threshold. "Look at the locking mechanism on that gate. That's a magnetic shear lock, 5,000 pounds of holding force. And look at the hydraulic arm. It's installed on the inside." I glanced in the rearview mirror. "The geometry is wrong for a residential gate," Jason whispered. "Once this shuts, you can't force it open from the outside without a battering ram. It's designed to keep people in, not just out. Good thing we're on the inside, then." I tried to joke, but the laughter died in my throat. A cold knot, tight and heavy as a plumb bob, settled in my stomach. We drove through, and I watched in the mirror as the gate slammed shut with a finality that echoed off the canyon walls. It sounded like a prison door closing for the night. The driveway was paved with crushed black slate, sharp and expensive. It was filled with a curated selection of luxury machinery. Mercedes sedans, a Porsche Cayenne, a Bentley. My truck, with its dented bumper and mud-splattered wheel wells, looked like a work boot in a closet full of Italian stilettos. I parked at the far end of the row, backing in. It was a habit from 40 years on. Job sites, always back in. Always be ready to leave in a hurry if a wall starts to buckle or a crane tips. Always have an exit strategy. Richard met us at the front door. He was wearing a velvet tuxedo that shimmered under the porch lights. A garment that cost more than the down payment on my first house. He was smiling, his teeth bleached a blinding white, but the smile didn't reach his eyes. His eyes were restless. They darted around the driveway, checking the sky, checking the perimeter, checking us. "Frank." "The prodigal brother," Richard boomed. His voice was too loud in the crisp, silent air. He stepped forward and slapped my shoulder. His hand was clammy, sweating despite the chill. "And Jason, the genius engineer. Welcome into the sanctum." "Where's Mom?" I asked, stepping out of his reach. I didn't have the patience for the performance. Inside, holding court like the Queen of Sheba." Richard ushered us in, his movements jerky and over-caffeinated. The house was freezing. That was the first physical sensation that hit me. A wall of refrigerated air. The thermostat must have been set to 6. The air smelled sterile, like ozone and industrial cleaning fluid, masking a faint underlying scent of something metallic like old copper pipes or dried blood. "Chilly in here," I commented, buttoning my coat back up. "Oh, the HVAC is acting up," Richard said quickly, waving a dismissive hand. "Supply chain issues. Parts are on order from Germany. You know how it is. Come, get a drink. Warm the blood." We walked into the main living area. It was a cavernous room, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the black void of the valley. The glass was so clear it felt like the room ended in nothingness. There were about 20 guests scattered around, clutching crystal tumblers. None of them were family. They were men in expensive, ill-fitting suits, with hard, calculating faces. I spotted Elias Vance, a local real estate shark I'd done foundation work for years ago. He looked pale, sweating profusely, loosening his tie, as if it were a noose. The women were dripping in heavy jewelry, but they looked bored and anxious, checking their watches. "Who are these people?" Jason whispered to me, leaning close. "I don't recognize a single soul. No cousins, no neighbors from the old block. Investors," I guessed, scanning the room. "Or creditors. People Richard owes money to, or people he's trying to hustle. We found Mom sitting in a wheelchair by the fireplace, though the gas logs were barely flickering. She looked small, impossibly small, like a bird that had fallen from the nest. Her silver hair was perfectly coiffed, sprayed into a helmet of gray, but her eyes were milky and unfocused. She was staring at the unlit logs, her hands trembling in her lap, plucking at the fabric of her dress. Standing next to her was a man I didn't know. He wore a gray suit and wire-rimmed glasses, checking her pulse with a cold detachment. "Dr. Eris Thorne," the man said, nodding to me without smiling. "I'm monitoring Eleanor's condition." "Mom?" I knelt beside her, the cartilage in my knees popping. She turned her head slowly, the movement jagged. It took her a long, agonizing moment to find my face in the fog of her mind. "Frankie," she rasped. Her voice was thin, like dry leaves skittering on pavement. "Is that you, Frankie?" "I'm here, Ma. Happy birthday." I took her hand. It was ice cold. I want to go home, Frankie," she whispered, leaning in so close I could smell the stale medication on her breath. "I don't like this place. It's too sharp. The walls, they hum. It hurts my ears." "It's just the wind, Mom." Clara, my sister, appeared behind us. She looked brittle, her skin pale and drawn tight over her cheekbones like parchment. She held a glass of white wine with both hands to stop it from shaking, the liquid rippling in the glass. "Don't upset her, Frank. She's having a good day." "I'm not upsetting her, Clara. I'm talking to her." I stood up, towering over my sister. I saw the fear in her eyes, not of me, but of something else. "Why is she in a wheelchair? She was walking fine last month." I saw her walking the garden at the nursing home. "She had a fall," Clara said, looking away, staring at a piece of abstract art on the wall. "Dr. Thorne prescribed bed rest, and something to help her nerves. She gets confused. She wanders." Jason stepped forward, his eyes scanning Mom's face with clinical precision. He gently touched her wrist, feeling her pulse, then looked at her pupils. "Her pupils are pinned," Jason said flatly, his voice carrying a dangerous edge. "And her skin is clammy. Her respiration is shallow. What did Dr. Thorne give her?" "This isn't just a sedative, Aunt Clara. This looks like an opiate overdose. It's a mild relaxant," Richard interjected, appearing suddenly with a tray of single malt scotch to help her handle the excitement. "You know how she gets when there's a crowd." "I know she doesn't take pills," I said, staring at Richard. "She takes aspirin for her heart. And vitamins. She looks drugged, Richard. She looks barely conscious." "Careful, Frank." Richard's smile vanished instantly, replaced by a sneer that revealed the rot beneath the veneer. "You're a guest in my house. Do not insult my hospitality." "I'm a brother in my mother's presence," I shot back, stepping into his space. "And I know a faulty structure when I see one." I wanted to hit him. My fist curled at my side. "Dinner is served," the waiter announced, his voice booming across the room. I looked at the waiter. He was a brute of a man, neck thick as a tree stump, wearing a white jacket that strained at the seams of his shoulders. His name tag read Marcus. He didn't move like a service worker. He moved like a bouncer or a mercenary. He wasn't watching the guests or the food. He was watching me. He was assessing threats. "Let's eat," I said to Jason, keeping my voice low and level. "Keep your eyes open. Calculate the exits." The dining room was a glass box extending out over the cliff, cantilevered over a 1,000-foot drop. It was a marvel of engineering, spectacular and terrifying. We sat at a long table made of polished obsidians. Richard sat at the head, Clara at the foot. I sat next to Mom, cutting her meat for her because her hands were too weak to hold the knife. The silence in the room was heavy, suffocating. A young waitress named Sarah came to pour water. Her hand shook so violently that she spilled a few drops on the table. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, her eyes wide with terror. She glanced at Marcus, the head of security, who was standing by the door. She wasn't afraid of losing her job. She was afraid of losing her life. The conversation was stilted, a series of disjointed sentences that fell flat. The investors talked about leverage, liquidity, and offshore account. Richard bragged about his new developments in Dubai. claiming he was building the tallest residential tower in the hemisphere. I knew for a fact his permit had been denied 3 weeks ago. Midway through the meal, Richard stood up and tapped his glass with a silver spoon. The sound rang out like a gunshot. "A toast," he announced, raising a glass of dark red wine. "To Eleanor, the matriarch, the foundation of our lives." We raised our glasses. Mom stared at her water glass, unmoving, a drop of drool gathering at the corner of her mouth. I wiped it away gently with my napkin. "And," Richard continued, reaching under the table and pulling out a blue leather folder, "to the future. As a birthday gift to Mom, to ensure her legacy, Claire and I have finally organized the family trust. We've consolidated the assets to ensure her care is top tier forever. No more nursing homes. Private care, here at Highfall." He walked over to Mom, placing the folder in front of her. The leather creaked. "Just a few signatures, Mom, like we talked about, right here on the line." "I don't have my glasses," Mom mumbled, blinking. "I can't see the letters." "I'll guide your hand," Richard said, uncapping a heavy fountain pen. "It's just formalities." "Hold on," I said. My voice echoed in the silent room, bouncing off the glass walls. "I'd like to see that." Richard froze. "It's standard legal boilerplate, Frank," he snapped, his patience fraying. "Trust structures, asset allocation. You wouldn't understand it. Stick to bricks and mortar. Leave the finance to the adult." "I understand contracts," I said, standing up. My chair scraped loudly against the stone floor. "I deal with them every day. Liability, indemnity, force majeure. If it concerns Mom's estate, and if you're asking a medicated woman to sign it, I'm reading it." I reached for the folder. Marcus, the tree stump waiter, stepped forward. He blocked my path. He didn't say a word, just imposed his physical presence between me and the document. I smelled tobacco and gun oil on him. "This is a private family matter," Richard sneered, his face flushing. "Sit down, Frank." Jason stood up. The movement was fluid, calculated. "Actually, Uncle Richard, I think I need to use the restroom, and I'd like to check on my car. I think I left the interior lights on. I don't want a dead battery up here." "Restroom is down the hall, second door on the left," Richard said, his eyes narrowing into slits. "But the front doors are locked for the night. The alarm system is armed. You can't go outside. Motion sensors." "Right," Jason said, nodding slowly. "Safety first. Wouldn't want anyone breaking in." Jason walked out of the room. I stayed standing, staring at Marcus. I was 60 years old, but I was strong. I spent my days lifting beams and hauling concrete. This guy was gym muscle vanity bulk. There was a difference between strength built for show and strength built for work. "I'm not signing," Mom said suddenly. Her voice was clearer, cutting through the tension. "Not without Frank. Frank checks the foundation. Always." Richard's face turned a shade of purple I'd never seen. The veins in his neck bulged. "You will sign. You ungrateful old—" "Richard," Clara shrieked, dropping her fork. The tension in the room was a physical weight, a measurable pressure. It was the sound of a structural beam cracking, the groan of timber just before the roof collapses. The real betrayal was still waiting in the shadows. 10 minutes passed. They felt like 10 hours. Richard was whispering furiously to Dr. Thorne in the corner. The waiters were circling the table like sharks in a tank, their eyes dead and flat. Jason walked back into the room. He didn't look at me. He walked straight to Mom's chair. He leaned down, pretending to fix her napkin, smoothing the fabric over her chest. Then he moved to me. He placed a hand on my shoulder, leaning in close, his breath hot against my ear. "Get your bag," he whispered, the sound barely a breath. "We're leaving? Now, act like nothing's wrong. Don't look at Marcus." I looked at him. His face was pale, all the blood drained from it. His jaw was set in a hard line, his muscles coiled tight, his eyes were wide, conveying a terror I had never seen in my son, not even when he fell off the roof when he was 12. "I thought you were being dramatic," I muttered under my breath, picking up my water glass to mask my mouth. "Until I locked the car doors," he whispered back, a nonsensical phrase, until I realized he meant mental doors. He was locking us into survival mode. Something's very, very wrong. "What did you see?" I hissed. "I went to the basement," Jason whispered, his lips barely moving. "I picked the lock on the service panel. The HVAC system. It's not broken. It's set to reverse cycle. And there are tanks, Dad. 4 industrial nitrogen tanks, hooked up to the main intake manifold. And timers. Digital timers wired into the smart home hub. Nitrogen? It displaces oxygen, Jason said, his voice trembling slightly. It's odorless, colorless. You just get tired. You fall asleep, and you never wake up. They're gonna gas the house. Everyone falls asleep. The faulty heater is blamed. Carbon monoxide or an O2 leak. A tragic accident. Richard inherits the estate. The insurance, the trust. No witnesses. My ears rang. For a second, I forgot how to breathe. When? The timer is set for 9:00 p.m. I checked my watch. 8:52 p.m. 8 minutes. We had 8 minutes before the air in the room turned into a tomb. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. I looked at Richard. He was checking his watch too, a bead of sweat rolling down his temple. I had to be the father. I had to be the builder. I had to construct a way out of a room that was designed to have no exits. Well, I clapped my hands together, forcing a boisterous laugh that sounded manic in my own ears. I stood up. You know what? Mom is looking exhausted. I think the excitement is too much. We're going to take her for a quick breath of fresh air on the terrace before the cake comes out. She needs oxygen. No, Richard shouted, jumping up from his chair. The terrace doors are sealed. For the what? The wind load. You can't open them. Then we'll go to the front, I said, grabbing the handles of the wheelchair. Sit down, Frank, Marcus said, stepping directly in front of me, his hand going inside his jacket. Move, I said, my voice low. I said, sit down. Marcus pulled a gun. It was a matte black pistol with a suppressor sewered onto the barrel. The room erupted in gasps. The investors looked confused, then terrified. Elias Vance stood up, his chair clattering back. Richard, this wasn't the deal. No guns. Sit down, Elias. Richard screamed. This wasn't a party. It was a mass execution. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was that Clara was crying, but she wasn't surprised. I didn't argue. I didn't negotiate. I reacted. 40 years of construction had taught me that when a wall starts to fall, you don't talk to it, you move. I grabbed the heavy crystal wine decanter from the table, thick lidded glass filled with expensive Bordeaux, and I swung it with every ounce of rotational torque I possessed. Crack. It connected with Marcus's jaw with a sickening crunch. The glass didn't break, but his face did. He went down like a sack of wet cement, the gun skittering across the floor. Jason, go! I screamed. Jason didn't hesitate. He didn't go for the gun. He went for the architecture. He grabbed the heavy oak chair he had been sitting on and hurled it not at the waiters, but through the plate glass window overlooking the terrace. The glass was reinforced, tempered safety glass, but Jason knew physics. He didn't aim for the center. He aimed for the corner, the stress point where the tension was highest. Shatter. The window exploded into a million diamonds. The cold night wind roared in, carrying the sound of the howling forest. Richard, what are you doing? Clara screamed, cowering under the table, hands over her head. Kill them, Richard shrieked, his voice cracking. Don't let them leave. Seal the room. The other 2 waiters drew weapons. Bullets impacted the wall behind me, sending showers of drywall dust into the air. Mom, hold on. I grabbed the wheelchair handles. I didn't push it. I lifted the back wheels and ran, shoving her right through the shattered glass frame onto the stone terrace. Frank, Mom wailed, gripping the armrests. I didn't stop. We were outside. The wind was brutal, cutting through my coat. The gate is locked, Jason yelled, vaulting through the broken window behind me, glass crunching under his boots. You can't drive out. The walls are too high to climb. We aren't driving, I shouted over the wind. The service lift. I knew this house. I had helped my father build the original deck on this property 40 years ago, long before Richard tore it down to build this monstrosity. But the geography hadn't changed. There was an old service lift for bringing firewood and supplies up from the lower logging road. We ran along the terrace. Bullets chipped the stone railing around us, sparking in the dark. We reached the lift. It was an ancient iron cage, rusted and neglected, hanging from an old cable that looked dangerously frayed. It won't hold, Jason yelled, looking at the rusted pulley. The load capacity is compromised. That has to. I yanked the gate open and shoved the wheelchair in. Get in! I grabbed Jason by the collar and pulled him in, slamming the gate shut. I hit the mechanical lever. The old motor groaned. A horrible grinding sound of metal on metal, and the cage lurched downward into the darkness of the cliffside. Above us, Richard appeared at the railing, silhouetted against the light of the house. He fired wildly into the dark, muzzle flashes blooming like evil flowers. You're dead, Frank. You hear me? You're dead. We descended into the black pine forest, the cable singing a song of 10 and rest. My legs shook, but I didn't stop. Not this time. The lift hit the bottom with a clang that resonated through the valley. We were on the old logging road, a mile below the house, surrounded by trees as thick as pillars. The car is up there, Jason panted, wiping sweat and blood from his forehead. We're stranded. We're on foot in the middle of nowhere. No, I said, looking at the dark woods. My breath plumed in the air. We have legs, and we have the high ground, sort of. They'll come down, Jason said, his mind racing through scenarios. They have SUVs. They know this road. Let them come, I said. Push Mom into the brush. I'll cover the rear. We moved to the fast as we could over the rutted dirt road. Mom was silent now, in shock, her eyes wide and staring at the treetops. Headlights appeared behind us, cutting through the trees like searchlights. 2 SUVs were tearing down the switchbacks. Engines roaring. Hide, I ordered. We pushed the wheelchair into a dense thicket of rhododendrons, the leaves waxy and thick. I crouched behind a large oak tree, pressing my back against the bark. The first SUV roared past, mud spraying everywhere. They were going to the main road to cut us off. They think we're running for the highway, I whispered. Standard procedure. Where are we going? Jason asked, shivering. The nearest town is 20 miles away. The old ranger station, I said. It's 3 miles west. It has a landline. 3 miles with a wheelchair. In the dark? On this terrain? Jason looked at me like I was insane. Dad, the axle on that chair will snap in 100 yards. You have a better idea? Yeah, Jason said. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small black device. It looked like a garage door opener with an antenna. I cloned Richard's gate key while we were standing in the driveway. It's a universal RFID spoofer. I use it for penetration testing at work sites. I stared at him. You what? I didn't trust him, Jason said grimly. I scanned the frequency when he opened it for us. If we can get back to the truck, I can open the gate. Go back up? I asked. Into the line of fire? Into the gas? They're all coming down, Jason reasoned, pointing up the mountain. Look, he was right. The taillights of the SUVs were snaking down the road below us. The house lights were blazing above, but the driveway was dark. The house is empty, Jason said. Or mostly empty. The hired guns are chasing us, and my truck has the satellite phone in the glove box. I forgot to grab it. It was crazy. It was suicide. It was the only plan that had a chance of working. Okay, I said. We leave Mom here, hidden. We go back up the service stairs. We get the truck. We come back for her. I kissed Mom's forehead. Her skin was freezing. Stay quiet, Mom. We'll be right back. Don't make a sound. Be careful, Frankie, she whispered. A lucid moment in the chaos. Watch your step. I looked at her one last time. It felt like goodbye. If you're still hooked on this journey with us, hit like before we continue. We're going back into the fire. We climbed the service stairs. 400 rotting wooden steps bolted into the rock face. My lungs burned like I had swallowed fire. My legs screamed with every step, but the anger fueled me. The rage at what Richard had tried to do, to treat my mother like a depreciating asset to be liquidated, gave me the strength of a younger man. We reached the terrace. The wind was howling now, a gale force. The house was silent. The broken window gaped like a wound. We crept through the glass. The dining room was a wreck. The gas, I sniffed. The air was clear. The wind from the broken window had vented the room. The nitrogen couldn't concentrate. Clear, Jason whispered. We moved to the front door. I unlocked it from the inside. We slipped out to the driveway. My truck was there, a dark hulk in the moonlight. But so was Richard. He was standing by my truck holding a red gas can. He was dousing my tires, splashing gasoline over the hood. Dr. Thorne was standing next to him, trembling, holding a flare. "I knew you'd come back," Richard hissed. He pulled a gold Zippo lighter from his pocket. He flicked it open. The flame danced in the wind. "Rats always come back for the cheese." I didn't slow down. I didn't think. I tackled him. We hit the gravel hard. Richard was younger, but he was soft. He was doughy from years of sitting in leather chairs. I was hard. I was made of concrete and rebar. I punched him in the ribs, feeling the satisfying crack of bone. He screamed, a high-pitched wail. Dr. Thorne dropped the flare and ran, disappearing into the dark. "You tried to kill our mother," I roared, hitting him again. "She's dead anyway," Richard spat, blood coating his teeth. "She's money in a bank account. I needed it. The firm is under. I needed the liquidity. You're the one who's under," I shouted. Jason ran to the truck. "Dad, get in." I landed one last blow, knocking the lighter from Richard's hand. It fell into a puddle, sizzling out. I scrambled up and dove into the driver's seat. Jason was already in the passenger seat. He pointed his device at the gate and hit the button. The massive iron gate at the end of the driveway groaned. It hesitated, then began to slide open. "Go," Jason yelled. I floored it. The diesel engine roared to life. The truck tires spun, throwing gravel, then found traction. Richard scrambled up, grabbing the gas can, trying to throw it at the truck, but we were already moving. We roared through the gate, just as it started to close again. The side mirror clipped the metal, shattering, but we were through. I didn't look back. There was nothing there worth saving. We careened down the mountain road, drifting corners like a rally car. I knew every pothole, every turn, every drop-off. I drove with a focus I hadn't felt since I framed the high-pitched roof on the cathedral in '98. The steering wheel shook in my hands, vibrating with the violence of the road. We found the spot where we left Mom. I slammed on the brakes, the truck skidding sideways. Jason jumped out. Seconds later, he was lifting her into the back seat. She was shivering but alive. "Go, go, go," as I drove. I drove like the devil himself was in the rearview mirror. I saw headlights in the distance. The SUV's coming back up. "Hold on." I swerved off the main road onto an old logging trail I knew. It was steep, dangerous, and barely wide enough for the truck. Branches whipped against the windshield like cracks of a whip. 10 minutes later, we hit the county line. The cell signal bars on Jason's phone popped up. 1 bar, 2 bars, LT. "Call them," I said, my voice hoarse. Jason dialed, his hands shaking so hard he almost dropped the phone. 911, what is your emergency? I grabbed the phone from him. "This is Frank Miller. I'm reporting an attempted murder, kidnapping, and conspiracy at the Highfall estate. My brother-in-law, Richard Vane, has armed mercenaries on site. They have nitrogen gas tanks rigged to the ventilation system. Send the state police. Send the SWAT team. And send an ambulance." My hand was shaking so hard I could barely hold the phone against my ear. We waited at the bottom of the mountain, parked at a gas station under the harsh hum-hum fluorescent lights. We watched the police lights snake up the road like a river of blue fire. It was beautiful. They arrested Richard in the driveway. He was trying to wash the gasoline off his hands in a decorative fountain. Clara was found hiding in the master bathroom, clutching the unsigned trust documents, sobbing. The mercenaries had fled into the woods, but the thermal imaging on the police helicopter picked them up within an hour. The K9 units finished the job. They found the nitrogen tanks. They found the digital timers. They found the waiters had criminal records a mile long, protection rackets, assault, armed robbery. Sarah, the waitress who had spilled the water, gave a statement. She told them everything, how Richard had confiscated their phones, how he had threatened their family. Her testimony was the final nail in the coffin. It was over, the structure Richard had built. The lies, the fraud, the appearance of wealth had collapsed under its own weight. I watched from the hood of my truck as they brought him down in cuffs. He looked small. He looked like nothing. 6 months later, I stood on the deck of my own house, a sturdy A-frame I had built with my own hands 30 years ago. The sun was setting, casting a warm, golden glow over the yard. The smell of charcoal and grilled burgers filled the air. Mom was sitting in the garden, watching the birds at the feeder. She was in a new wheelchair, one that glided smoothly over the brick pavers I had laid for her just last week. She lived with me now. She still had bad days, days where she didn't know where she was. But she knew she was loved. Jason walked out, holding 2 cold beers. He handed one to me. Hearing is tomorrow, Jason said, leaning his elbows on the railing. I know, I said. Richard is pleading insanity. He won't get it, Jason said. The forensic engineering report on the HVAC system proved premeditation. The timers were digital. He programmed them 3 days in advance. He's going away for life. Clara got 5 years for conspiracy. I took a sip of beer. It tasted cold and clean. I looked at the beams of my porch roof. I saw the checks in the wood, the way the grain flowed. You know, I said, tracing the grain of the wood with my thumb, I always told you that you can't build a house on a bad foundation. Richard thought money was the foundation. He thought power was the foundation. Yeah, Jason said, looking at me. He was wrong, I said. I looked at Mom, then at my son. Loyalty. That's the only foundation that holds weight. That's the only thing that doesn't crack under pressure. Jason smiled. It was a real smile, one that reached his eyes. He clinked his bottle against mine. To the foundation, he said. To the foundation, I agreed. We stood there as the stars came out, a father and a son who had walked into the fire and walked out carrying what mattered most. We had locked the doors that night not to keep the world out, but to keep the family in. And that bond, unlike Richard's glass house on the cliff, would never break. Thanks for walking this journey with us all the way. With Frank and Richard in mind, was this ending how it should have happened? Or something else?